Please go ahead.
Thank you, Sister Varia. I hear that today there is a snowstorm in BC and there are power outages. In spite of that, many of you have joined today. So thank you so much. And I pray to Swami that everybody is safe. My beloved Swami, please accept our loving salutations at your divine lotus feet. We welcome you to preside over this workshop today and accept our humble offering. Brother Michael, my dear sisters and brothers, Om Shri Sai Ram. On behalf of our National President, Brother Siva Nadaraja, and Vice President, Sister Preeti Grover, and the National Education team, I extend a very warm and loving welcome to Brother Michael D Mccarty and to each and every one of you who have joined us today to learn and participate in our storytelling workshop. Our beloved Swami beautifully instructs us on storytelling as thus: you must examine every story or narration that you place before the children from the point of view of individual faith and social harmony. Does this lead the child to a better, more harmonious, a more God-oriented life? That is the question you should ask yourself. This was taken from Swami's discourse on January 3rd, 1974. Okay, who is leading the workshop today? None other than one of our own Sai brothers, Brother Michael, who is a master storyteller. Brother Michael has touched the lives of so many people of all ages in various parts of our world and has inspired them to make positive changes. He also conducts workshops on storytelling, sharing the special skill with several people. His life has been told in a documentary called Belonging in the USA, the Michael D Mccarty story. The documentary has a powerful quote from Brother Michael about belonging. He goes on to say, belonging is finding that place which you belong and doing that which you are meant to do. My dear Brother Michael, happiness personified, you have found your belonging in our beloved Swami's heart and you are doing exactly what he wills you to do. Here is a short bio on Brother Michael in his own words. August 13th, 1982 was the beginning of my conscious adventure with Sathya Sai Baba. In fact, he had saved my life on several occasions a decade before. Baba told me in an interview that I need not worry about my health, money, or career, that he would take care. And he has, although rarely in the way that I had wanted things to work out. I had never heard of a professional storyteller, but Swami connected me with the perfect job. That's what he says. Baba has been my guide through the great adventure that is my life, and I'm enjoying the ride. Brother Michael also reminds us of Swami's instructions. You must cultivate the quality of always being joyful with a smile on your face. This will give you a special virtue. Today's program will start with Brother Michael's talk, followed by a breakout session where the gurus will be sharing their thoughts on the stories that have been pre-selected and shared with all of you. The discussions will be led by facilitators identified for each group. Following this, some groups will be randomly selected to share their presentations, and we will end today's program with a Q&A session with Brother Michael. Just to let you know, today's session is main session with the Brother Michael is being recorded so that it can be shared with every one of you and people who have also missed this session. Without any further delay, I welcome Brother Michael to the virtual podium. Sai Ram, Brother Michael.
Hey, Sai Ram. How the heaven are y'all? Yay. Whoa. I am very happy, very, very happy to be giving this workshop with you all. I love storytelling. And as I said, Baba has been directing and guiding my life long before I knew which way was up. And I remember it was in the 80s, 88, 89. I met this guy named Lad Bogdanoff. And it was his first trip, and he looked confused and bewildered. And so what we do, we take him under our wing and we direct and guide him and help him get along. So we talked about many things that have become great friends. Then that was 88, 89. Years later, 92, I would become a professional storyteller. Shortly after that, I would talk to Lad, and he said, Michael, do you remember what you told me at the ashram? I said, no. Apparently we were talking, and he asked me, what would I do as a profession if I could do anything I wanted to do? And I said, I'd tell stories. I had no recollection of this whatsoever. And here I am running my mouth around the country and around the world. That Sai Baba guy, he's a good employment agent. I recommend him highly. Okay. So what I want to do is I'm going to tell you just a little bit about how I got into storytelling as a profession. And then I want to share some little tidbits and stories about various things I've encountered. And then we'll do lots of stuff, and we'll have a lot of fun, and y'all will learn stuff. So first thing I have to do, I ask y'all to remind me this. I got to tell this story because Bozo is right over my right shoulder. Baba has a way of letting you know what you're supposed to do. So I used to live in Chicago, and I was a member of the Psi Center there. We met on Sunday. So one Sunday I go in, I sit down on the men's side on the floor, and a friend of mine is holding her 2-year-old daughter like this over her shoulder. And I look at the little girl, and I go like that. And oh my God, she started, she was screaming, she was beating her mom, she was kicking her. Her mother had to take her out of the room. From that day forward, we could not be in the same room. As soon as she saw me pulling her mother's hair and beating her and kicking her, I stopped going. I stopped going to bhajans for weeks, turned into months. After a few months, I thought, maybe she won't be there. Maybe she won't remember. Maybe she got over whatever it is. So I go and I peek into the room. I don't see her. And I go in and I sit down on the floor. And as soon as my butt hits the floor, I feel little eyes looking at me. And I look at her and I brace myself. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. She sat there the whole meeting looking at me. After the meeting, her mother comes up and says, I'll bet you're wondering what happened. Duh, yeah. She said, we were sitting one day and we were watching Bozo, and she was just laughing and laughing. I said, you like Bozo? Yes, mommy, I like Bozo. You like clowns? Yes, mommy, I love clowns. Michael is just like Bozo. He's a clown. So my dharma was defined by this 2-year-old girl, Prashanti, who is now a successful attorney with 2 children of her own. And we laugh about this all the time. When I got that album, I took a picture, I sent a copy of it to her. I'm probably gonna send her the album. So I've worked with every age group from preschool, and some of you know about my work in the prisons. I've learned a lot of little lessons, and so I'll share some of those things with you. One thing that, as storytellers, especially storytellers who are teaching storytelling and teaching stories to others, is we need to understand a couple of things. One, let's say a story, for you, a particular story has a particular lesson or moral, and that's fine. But you have to know that sometimes somebody will take something different. There's a story of Birbal, Akbar the Great. In that story, a storyteller comes to Akbar's court, and he's praising Akbar to the point where he says, you are greater than God himself. And Akbar kicks him down with all kinds of goodies, and the man runs away. Then he says, well, how am I greater than God? Some of you, all of you probably know this story. I'm gonna be real brief. So he turns to the rest of the court, and they're all like, "Ooh, I don't want to offend God. I don't want to offend Akbar. What am I going to say?" And finally, he turns to Birbal, and he says, "Your Majesty, there's one thing that you can do that God cannot. If you are displeased with someone, you can banish them from your kingdom. God can't do that." And it's like Akbar has this experience. So my interpretation of the story is that, God's kingdom is infinite. Well, my friend Leslie Perry, who was one of my storytelling friends and mentors, he got something totally different from the story. And that's something you have to be ready for, all right? Another thing, I was giving a program in maybe Ohio or Boston or something for a Psi center, a Psi retreat. And there were these girls, they were high school young ladies. And they were preparing a program for the retreat. Now, two of them had a sudden death. One of their friends or cousins or sisters had died suddenly, the same age, like I said, freshman or sophomore in high school. And they wanted to address dealing with death in their presentation. They weren't allowed to, all right? And no judgment on that whatsoever. But sometimes you have got to deal with something before you can deal with something else. Give you an example. I was doing a program at a school in Encino in Southern California. And this was one of those schools that had everything from kindergarten to 12th grade. So I'm there to do a Halloween program. So I arrive at the school and I find that one of the very popular high school kids had died suddenly and tragically just a day or two prior. So the whole school was shaken by this. And I knew right away that I had to address this. I couldn't just go into them doing a Halloween program without addressing this issue. There is a story, it's called The Cowtail Switch. There's also a book of the same name, The Cowtail Switch by Harold Colander. Very easy book to find. When I first became a storyteller, this was one of the first books I came across. And there are a variety of stories in there, primarily from West Africa. But the title story, A Cowtail Switch, is something apart. And I'll tell you that in a second. But I read through all the stories in the book. I marked off the stories that were of interest to me. The Cowtail Switch was not one of them. So that's around 1992, 93. In 1995, my mother passed away. I went to Chicago for the funeral. I came back home, went to one of the storytelling meetings that I go to, and Coney the Story Man, a storyteller from Santa Barbara, told the Cowtail Switch. And I'll tell it to you now so you understand the focus. Once in a village in the west of Africa, there was a man named Ogalusa. He was a mighty hunter, a great hunter. He had a beautiful wife and 6 strong sons who he was training, and his wife was pregnant with what he would hope was a 7th son. Well, one day Ogalusa left to go on a hunt. Those days became weeks, those weeks became months. Not uncommon, but not common. And then the months went on. Meanwhile, the 6 brothers took care of their mother, who gave birth to a 7th son whose name was Puli. Puli developed quickly. And the first words that came out of his mouth were, "Where is my father?" Yes, the brother said, "What has happened to father?" And so the 6 brothers set off in search for their father. Even though it had been a long time, he had trained them well. One brother picked up the trail. He would lose it. Another brother picked it up. And this went on and on and on until they found this clearing. And there were the bones scattered of Ogalusa and his rusted weapons. He had been killed by some creature. But each of these brothers had a power. They were able to reassemble the bones, restore the organs, restore the flesh, restore the circulation of blood, restore the power of movement, restore the power of speech. And Ogalusa looked at his son and said, where are my weapons? They gathered his weapons and they took him back to the village. When they found that Ogalusa had returned from the land of the dead, there was a special ceremony, an 8-day ceremony. He was to remain in his hut during this ceremony. While in his hut, he would make a cowtail switch. It would be the most beautiful cowtail switch anyone had ever seen or heard of. On that 8th day, when he came out and was presented on the dais, they saw the cowtail switch. Everybody, oh, Ogalusa is beautiful. Oh my God, what are you going to do with it? And he said, I will give it to the son most responsible for returning me from the land of the dead. Well, the brothers started arguing amongst each other. Well, I did this. I found the trail. You lost your trail. I picked it up. I restored this. I restored that. Ogalusa said nothing. He stood on the dais. He held up the cowtail switch and everyone grew silent. He said, I will give this to my son, Puli. And everybody said, Puli, he's a baby. What did... And then they remembered that Puli had been the one who had remembered. And it is said from that day to this, as long as we remember our loved ones who have passed on, as long as we remember them and tell their stories, no one is ever truly dead. Now, I told this story to the assembly, and the power of the story is twofold. One, it addressed the passing, but as important, if not more so, it gave them something that they could do. They could sit and they could talk about their friend. They could talk about their older brother. They could share the stories, and that gave them something too. That empowered them. That is the power of stories, the power to empower us, to help us see. Okay, now let me give you a a whole nother kind of scenario. Like I said, you got some handouts that I address some of these things too, but there have been times when I have gotten up in front of an audience and they were not feeling it. And this could be anything from kindergarten to grown-ups. I once did a storytelling at a nightclub, and folks looked at me, a storyteller, ha, what? But most importantly, I remember doing a storytelling for some teachers, LAUSD public school teachers. And there was this one teacher who looked at me like, you ain't gonna teach me nothing about telling stories to no children, what you know. And she sat there, it was, I will not be entertained. I will not be amused. And she sat there and I'm telling stories. She, I got her. I got her. One of the most important things, I have storytelling tips that I do in my work in the prisons, but in general. Tell stories that you love. Tell stories that you care for. Tell stories that mean something to you. Because when you do that, and you're telling to whatever audience, your love and care for that story will be passed on to the audience. They see that you care about the story, and that will lend them the opportunity to listen. So tell stories that mean something to you. The other thing, one of the handouts is a bibliography with a bunch of books. Now, you can't see it, but I'm in my office, and I have a shelf here that's loaded with books, and on the other side of the office, I've got shelves. If you want folk tales from Mars, I got them, okay? I find stories all over the world. And one of the beautiful things, especially with our Psi world, is that devotees are in everywhere, every culture, every country. And it is by taking a peek into another culture that you can get an idea about the similarities and the differences. Now, I got to share this with you. I was doing a program at the Skirball Cultural Center here in Los Angeles. It was an outdoor program, and I was doing a variety of storytellers from all over the world. And so I have certain stories that I like to do, that I like to kick it off with. And I remember the last family to come in. Again, this is an outdoor setting, and there's the outdoor auditorium, and they sat all the way to the top. It was an older Indian man, his two grown daughters, and their kids. So when I saw them, I said, okay, I'm going to tell this story, Birbal's Search for Fools. And so at the end of as the last program of my story, I said, I'm going to tell this story, Birbal's Search for Fools. And I saw them, they were like, ooh, they were very excited. So I tell the story. I've modified the story. Remind me to talk about modifying stories. And afterwards, the first person to come up to me was one of the daughters. And she comes up to me, she said, our father used to tell us that story when we were children. And then the father comes up to me, and one of the things I do not do when I do stories, I don't do accents, I don't do anything like that, but I can't say this, you'll understand when I say it this way. The father comes up to me and says, very good story. And it was like a standing ovation. That's all he said, and a smile on his face. And here we're connecting this African-American, this Indian family by sharing a story. And that's the beauty of finding these different stories to share. Now, I just told you I had to tell you, you had to remind me of something. What was it? Anybody remember?
Modifying a story.
Modifying a story, yeah.
Say it again.
Modifying a story.
Oh yes, modifying stories. So that story, Birbal's Search for Fools, in the original story, there's like 10 fools. Okay, there's like 10 fools. When I tell the story, I use 4 of them. All right, and it's just that probably the first time I did it, I need to keep it in a certain time frame, and it works well with 4. So sometimes you can modify your stories. You have a license to do so. Why? Because you're a storyteller, and I give you license to do whatever you need to do to make that story work. And I do all kinds of things. Woo! So another thing about teaching storytelling and telling stories, you select the story because it means something to you. It has a lesson or what have you. The thing that is challenging to do is to present the story, like I said, without judgment and without pushing your agenda. That is, you let those kids or whoever you're talking to, if they take something different from the story, that's fine. You're not preaching, all right? You're not lecturing. And that's a difference. That's a difference. When you're telling a story and you're sharing a story, it comes from here. That's to me the most important thing, that it comes from your heart. And if someone has a little different take on the story, that's okay. Because something resonates differently for them, or more so than another part of the story. So this is something that always gets people. I don't memorize stories, all right? I don't memorize stories. One, I'm old. My mind is like leaking out the side of my ear sometime, and I'm glad if I can remember my name. So when I'm learning a story, I read the story, I read the story, I read the story till I see it in my mind. So when I get up in front of an audience to tell the story, I'm not memorizing words. I'm looking at the image of the story in my mind and telling from that image. Now, there are 2 advantages of this. One, like I said, you're not memorizing. You don't have to worry about missing a word. And I'm sure if any of us who have ever had to memorize something for a presentation, you forget one word, and the word could be the. But if you can't remember that word, the rest of the story does not exist until you remember that word. So I don't, like I said, I don't memorize, I visualize the story. So when I tell that story about Birbal, I'm seeing the guy who's riding on the horse with a bale of hay on top of his head. I see that, and that's what that's how I do that. Here's the other advantage of not memorizing. There's a story called The Strange Creature. It's a folk tale from Zimbabwe, and it was my first signature story. That was the story that got me lots of work. It rocked people's world, and especially the way I did it. When I originally started telling the story, it was a 5-minute story. It eventually ended up to being sometimes 10 and 12 minutes. Why? Because over the years of telling the story, now I'm not memorizing. And because I haven't memorized, it's not fixed. All of a sudden, something comes out of my mouth that has never come before. And I'm like, ooh, that was good. I hope I remember it. So that allows the story to grow. That allows the story to grow. One of the big problems, I just sort of dealt with it, but it still happens. You forget something. You forget a name, or you forget something, a sequence, or whatever. I was doing this story. It's a story from East Africa called The Bravest of Men. And it begins, once in a village in the east of Africa, there was a man whose name was Sadu. And Sadu didn't mind telling everybody he was the bravest of all men. So I get up in front of an audience to tell this story. And at this point, I've been telling this story for several years and dozens, if not hundreds of times. I get up in front of the audience. Once in a village in the east of Africa, there was a man whose name was, and I can't remember the name, Muhammad. Today, he Muhammad. That's the first name that popped into my head. He Muhammad today. If somebody says, what? I said, Dad, this is Tuesday, he Muhammad. Okay? You make something up. You fill something in. Most importantly, though, and I've seen this happen, I have seen people fall to pieces because they couldn't remember that name or the next word or the next sequence. And this one woman, she was telling before a group of kids, and she forgot something, and how shall I say, the language that came out of her mouth was not appropriate for that audience. So make something up, fill in the gap, just make something up. And you do not have to announce to the world that you forgot something. They don't know. So just keep going, just keep going. Now, whenever I'm telling a story, I don't care how big or small the audience is, I look into the eyes of every individual. If it's a small audience, if it's a big audience, I was in, I think I was in Durban, South Africa, doing a program for the size groups over there. I had an audience of about 500 or 600 people. And I couldn't look at every individual eye, but I looked in every area of the room as I was telling my story. So you have a connection. If you're telling and looking at your toes, or you're telling and you're looking up, or you're fixed at some space in the back, people are going to say, well, who are you telling to? Who is she telling to? Look at your audience. Now, here's a tip for you. Some of you, I'm sure, know about this. One of the things I learned, there are kids on the spectrum who cannot take eye contact. All right? I discovered that. So I'm looking through an audience one time, and I start looking at this kid, and as soon as my eyes get to him, and I understood what was going on. He can't take that direct eye contact. So thereafter, if I swept through that area again, I would not look directly. I look over him, I look past, but I understood, okay? I understood what was going on with him. So you take those things into account. Now, here's something else. You may get it in, especially in the older kids. You'll definitely get it when you're telling stories to adults sometime. I was telling, I had a specific incident I had in my head. Now I sort of did my head like that and it leaked out. So I'm telling, same audience in South Africa, same audience in South Africa. So I'm telling the story and this woman is in the second or third row. My entire presentation, it was over an hour. And it got to the point where I'm like, maybe I don't want to look her way at all. And she looked perturbed. I was about to use another word, I won't. When I got through with my presentation, this woman was the first one to come up to me and tell me how much she enjoyed it. She was a hard listener. I sometimes get like that, but depending on the subject. Some people just listen so intently. They're gone physically. They're not responding, but in their mind, they're with you every bit of the way. So don't worry, all right? If they're not throwing anything at you, you're probably okay, okay? So just keep your focus. Don't let that dissuade you, all right? Tell your story your way. Now, I know this will be a shock to you. I tend to be a little animated and out there when I'm telling stories. I know you can't believe it. I have leaped off stages into audiences, all right? And I got bad knees and a bad back. I was doing a storytelling at the National Storytelling Conference in San Diego in 1999. And there was a concert, I was one of the storytellers. So I'm in the green room getting ready for the story. Now, I'm putting on my knee braces, I'm stretching or what have you, tightening up my back brace or what have you. And my friend Sarah, who was also one of the tellers, she looked at me and said, looks like you getting ready to do some very physical storytelling. I said, oh yeah. That was one of those places where I leaped into the audience and scared the bejesus out of all kind of people. Sarah was the polar opposite. When she came on stage, she looked at her audience. Her voice was even. As she told her story, besides her head and her hands moving, that was it. And she had that audience just as captivated with her story as I did. So whatever way you tell, for whatever story you're telling, that's okay. Be you, all right, be you. Another similar example, I was at a story, British Columbia. I was in British Columbia doing a storytelling. And there was, I had gotten up on stage and again, rocked everything. This young lady who was from Egypt, a storyteller from Egypt, she walked onto the stage. And like I said, everybody was like in an uproar over me. What can I say? She stood in front of the audience and she looked at everybody. There was a balcony. She looked at everyone in the audience until everybody sort of settled down. Now she had them. She had them in the mindset that they needed to be for her story, and she told her story her way. All right? So your way is your way. Now, my way, I have stories. I remember the first time I told a story, because most of my stories tend to be funny. And I remember the first time I told a story, it's called The Song of the Slaves. It's a historical fiction about slavery. Ain't no funny in it, no way. And I remember one of my friends came up to me after, because everybody's expecting Mike's gonna tell a funny story. I was like, I guess not. And he said, Mike, I figured out 5 minutes in, I said, this ain't gonna be funny. And it got folks' attention. All right, that's not why I did it, but I just did it because that was the story. You have to be true to the story that you're telling. Have fun while you're telling your story. I had a guy in one of my prison classes, young guy, looked like he needed to be on a college campus, didn't look like he belonged in prison. He wasn't in prison long. And he would get up every week and tell a story, but he would tell a story, he's told it in a very serious way, even though it was a funny story. And so he comes up to me one day and says, Mike, what can I do? I said, why don't you have fun while you're telling the story? How about that? Have some fun while you're telling the story. The next class, he got up and he's telling the story and he had fun with it. Sometimes he would start laughing before he even said what everybody else was going to be laughing at, but it was okay. He was enjoying himself. And now the audience, they had license to enjoy his telling also. Have fun. Enjoy your telling. If it's a story that's touching, when I tell that story about the cowtail switch, it gets to me. It takes me back to my mother passing. It takes me back to Oconee, the story man, sharing that story for me and how much it meant to me and thinking about it after he passed away. So I tear up. I tear up when I tell that story sometime. However the story affects you, let it. Let it. Enjoy it. Feel whatever it is and let that audience be in your world of telling. Now, I don't know how many of you actually read the stories or tell the stories. Now, you can do both. I encourage telling for some of the reasons I've already spoken about. Let me tell you something. So I started telling as a profession in 1992. And over those first 5-10 years, I got a lot of invitations to tell stories at literary festivals where authors were presenting their books, were reading their stories. And why? Because they would be blah, 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 blah. They would be reading and glancing at the audience every now and then. And I watch audiences that there's some people who are very good at that, some not so much. But they had me come because I told stories and I'm locked on the audience. I do workshops. I've had authors of children's books and other type, and I encourage them. I say, okay, you can use the book, but look at the audience. Because if you're looking at the book, you're missing that connection. You're missing that connection. Look again, back to that, what I said earlier. You look into the eyes of your audience. You look at your audience. If you're just staring at the book the whole time, you're going to lose them. All right, you're going to lose it unless you're telling a story that everybody just loves. And if you were back in the day reading Harry Potter, you might, yeah, but look at your audience, engage with your audience, and have fun. Have fun. You paint your pictures with your words. You paint your pictures with your words. So however you're telling the story, use those descriptive words. Paint those pictures vividly, like you would like to see them. And no oopsing. No oopsing. I sort of referred to this a little later, but it needs to be addressed again. Because people, like I said, they'll announce, oops, I forgot. Don't do that. Or, full disclosure, there are exceptions. There always are. So about 3 years ago, I was doing a storytelling festival in Kansas City. And I was doing an Anansi the Spider story. Anansi the Spider stories are great stories for teaching and lessons. They started off in the west of Africa with the slave trade. They came through the Caribbean and throughout Jamaica and all of that. You have these other Anansi stories. So, okay, what was I talking about?
It was the exceptions to when we shouldn't oops.
Oh, so thank you. I'm telling the story in front of this audience. Now, it wasn't a real big audience. All of my fellow storytellers were in the audience, and the people who were at the audience were veterans of this festival. Even the young kids, they've been coming there since they were younger kids. So I'm telling something and I forgot something. And I looked at the audience, I said, I have just had the most bodacious brain fart in the history of storytelling. And they all were like, yeah, man, I understand, because they're all getting to be my age or about that. And then it came back and I went on with the story. All right. So that was a magic moment I was able to share with them. All right. So there's exceptions to those things. There's exception to those things. We talked about this a little bit with not preaching. Remember, don't give, unless you are doing something specific on a specific lesson, and even then, don't tell them what the moral is. Don't tell them what the story means. Find out what it means to them. All right, find out, because that's now you have engagement. When you tell the story and you say, so what did it mean to you? And people share their ideas, now their minds, they're really into the story. But if you say, no, this is what the story means, you shut that down. You shut that down. And story, when you tell stories and you let it be, as it were, you let people come and you talk about it, then the mind can engage, the mind is open, and people feel that that their perspective is accepted and appreciated. Everybody needs to know when the story ends, okay? When I'm doing my class in the prisons and I'm talking about this point, I tell the guys, every one of you knows somebody who tells the never ever ending story. It just goes on, and you're like, please let me die. I don't want to hear no more. This go on and on. So when now, if you're doing a story, a folk tale or something like that, that ending is defined. I do personal stories and I do also historical stories. The first thing I do when I'm doing something like that is determine where will the story end. And then everything I do takes me to that ending. For instance, there's a folk, by the way, how am I on time?
You have another 2 minutes.
Okay, so I'll end this with it and we'll go into the breakout room.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Knowing the ending.
so thank you. I'm telling the story about William and Ellen Craft. This is a true story. William and Ellen Crafts had been slaves in the South in Georgia, and they escaped. And they escaped from Georgia to Philadelphia. I could have ended the story there. They left Philadelphia and went to Canada. I could have ended the story there. From Canada, they went to London and raised a family. And then they came back to the United States to establish a school for the newly freed slaves. That's where I decided to end the story. So everything took me to that point. So know your ending. And then if you're making up a story, you're telling a large story and you want to reduce it, determine your ending and then make sure everything takes you there. Woo! Yay, storytelling. So I gotta drink some water.
Thank you, brother. Are you done, brother?
Yes, you may.
Oh, thank you so
start.
much. Oh my God, that was an amazing storytelling and great tips that you shared. I've noted lots of points. To me, what resonates was actually, while watching you, is the change in tone, how you really captivate the audience, the attention throughout the whole session. And there's so many points, not preaching or lecturing, visualizing the story, and be creative. Be your own self, right? Those are really great tips. Thank you so much. Now we'll be moving to the next part of the session. Dear participants, it's now time for the breakout session, and I would like to provide you with some instructions with regards to this activity. Each of you will soon be assigned to a group by Brother Imindu together, so you'll be with a facilitator. And each group will be given a short story that have been selected for you. Just to maybe to help who is gonna do which story. For the story one, it's the facilitator's name will be Brother Nandisha Shetty. Sister Daniela Kibedi will go with story 2. Sister Punita Vanet Patel will go with story 3. Sister Dharani Sathya will go with story 4. We have actually 10 in total. 5, Sister Aparna Murti. The story 6 will be by Sister Bhavani. Story 7 will be by Sister Bhavini. 8 will be by Sister Ishwari. 9 will be by Sister Baria, and 10 will be by Brother, one second, so his name is not showing on my screen here, Anushan. You've all these stories that you will be actually, it will be each group will be having one story that you will be dissecting, work together as a group. These short stories have been taken from Bhagawan discourses, Chinakatha, and folk tales from around the world, and they were shared with all of you. So we therefore humbly request all the gurus and the facilitators to have the stories handy, please. While I will be giving some instructions. Once you will be in your group, we encourage each facilitator to please identify a scribe first and a presenter at the start of the session itself. Next, your facilitator will share the story and the questions to you, and each group will then have to brainstorm on the following questions: how to present the story to the assigned age group, and what would be the topic that would be appropriate for the story. Determine what value or values the guru would like the students to take away, and how you as gurus would present the story to the children in a virtual setting. Please note the appropriate technique for the story must be selected based on the age of the children rather than in curriculum itself, okay? You will be given 20 minutes to complete this activity with the help of your facilitator, who will lead the group through discussion. And once you're back in the main room, after 20 minutes, 4 groups will be randomly selected to present their summary. And of course, we are fortunate to have Brother Michael, who will be providing feedback on each presentations. Now, does any one of you have any questions before we split into the rooms?
Sister Ruby, Sairam,
Yes.
This is Sausha here. I just wanted to add Brother Anushan. I think this is Brother Navaratnam Navakumaran. He's going to be one of the facilitators. So I just wanted to let you know.
Yes.
Second thing is, to the facilitators, we have given a set of questions, and you have only 20 minutes now. So make sure that, the main point would be having heard now, Brother, Michael's presentation, what group it would be appropriate. So you don't have to go through everything. In general, a summary, that is also fine. Okay. Thank you very much, Sister Sairam.
Perfect. So yeah, if we don't have any questions, maybe Brother Mindu, you can take over. Thank you.